everyone. Welcome to the Wondering Together podcast. It's a podcast brought to you by the Mindful Place. My name's James DeConti. I'm a qualified mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. I received my qualification through the University of Massachusetts, and it's recognized through the Oasis Institute. So when I speak about the practices that I have learned and that I teach, please keep in mind that the mindfulness instructions and meditation practices that I guide and practice myself are heavily influenced by this style of mindfulness or lineage, you might call it, even though it's recognized mostly as a secular mindfulness practice. So there's also some other teachers that I listen to that are a little more focused in the spiritual side of the mindfulness meditation practice. But just knowing that for the practices that I'm going to be talking about today, it's mostly derived from my training in mindfulness-based stress reduction. And if you want to learn more about that, you can Google it, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and learn all you want to learn. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today was things that I learned along the way while learning my mindfulness meditation practice that I would have liked to have as tips from the start. Things that took me a little while to learn. And a lot of the time in mindfulness and meditation practice, we are taught these things, let's say tips or strategies, by teachers, and they don't always take the first time or the second time or the 100th time. So I can remember certain things that I've read over and over or heard over and over as far as strategies that help me, and then they never really clicked for me and never really could make sense of them until one day they just did make sense. So if any of this stuff doesn't click right away or make sense, or you feel that you're not experiencing any change or growth, just know that there may be some later date when some of these words, or maybe you're reading a lot about mindfulness right now, there might be a later date when these things sort of like click and start to make sense, maybe one day while you're sitting and meditating. So even during this listening here, not putting so much focus on trying to get it all right and trying to make sure you learn the way and then do it the right way, because the tighter the mind gets in trying to fit everything into this little box, it could sometimes cause tension that sort of gets in the way. As far as the first tip, or I'll say big change for me in my mindfulness practice, was when I realized that I am not my thoughts. What I mean by that is, there are the thoughts. They exist and occur as they always have. And there's also this awareness of the thoughts that are happening. And this first big realization was these thoughts that I've been following through my life and thinking they were my life. I was under the impression that the stream of consciousness was my existence. Meaning, whatever is happening in my mind is all there is. And that was sort of the place that I was living from. And the practice of mindfulness, of being aware, practicing awareness, there was a shift. And that shift was, there's another place that I can perceive things from. And it was this, still is, but At the time, I was realizing it was this awareness, this thing, this presence that can recognize the thoughts, right? Something's watching the thoughts. I can sit in a room and experience my thoughts happening, but what was it that was experiencing the thoughts? And the first big shift was the recognition that, oh, there's this awareness. There's this mindfulness, you might call it, that can be aware of the thoughts, but can also be aware of a lot of different things. So it can be aware of bodily experiences, sensations in the body. It can be aware of sounds or sights or tastes. It can be aware of tactile sensation or the air on the skin. So there's this thing, this awareness that can be aware of the breath. It can be aware of the sounds. It can be aware of bodily sensations, but it can also be aware of thoughts. So thinking and the process of thought was just one thing that could be recognized within this other thing that was noticing them. And there was that shift of, oh, the thoughts are just a part of my experience. Just as breathing is part of my experience, and whatever is happening in my body, and whatever sounds are happening, whatever's happening externally, these are parts of experience. And one part of experience is the stream of thought, the stream of consciousness. So there was that shift of thinking, and stream of consciousness is not the entire existence. It's part of this greater space, this greater presence or awareness, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. So I don't know if that's much of a tip as much as something to look out for. So we can call it a tip, something to look out for in the mindfulness practice is this recognition that the thought and the stream of consciousness is just a part of the experience. And paying attention maybe in the next time you sit quietly, what is this other thing that's noticing the thoughts? And if you think of it as a flashlight, right? This awareness is a flashlight that can be shined onto the thoughts. It can also be shined onto other things. So resting in the experience of the flashlight itself, or this awareness as so that's more of just like something to be aware of the next time you meditate. There's also some more practical tips that might help. One of them is when it comes to posture, it's definitely easier to sit for longer periods of time once you find a posture that is sturdy and comfortable and works for you. And this will probably take some time. It took me probably 5 years until I found the posture that works the best for me. And what works the best for me is 2 circle cushions. I sit down with I sit down on the cushions underneath my butt, and I have my shins against the ground, and my back is up straight. So there's kind of like 3 points of contact, my butt on the cushion and then my 2 knees on the floor in front of me. But I also put a cushion underneath my circle cushions because it helps take the pressure off my knees. And when I rock my hips forward to straighten out my back, and I've come to learn that this works best for me over time. But I've also gone on a lot of meditation retreats and long classes where people are sitting in hundreds of different ways. So it's really ultimately going to be whatever works the best for you. But as far as tips for posture, I would try to find a place that is where your back can be straight, just because it will it will be easier during longer sits if your back is straight. It'll take some pressure off your spine. And also seeing if you can distribute the weight in whatever's holding your ground. So if you're sitting cross-legged, there'll be your legs will be pressed against the ground and your butt may be on the ground. So there's a lot of there's a distribution of weight where if you were just sitting where the weight was in one spot, like if a lot of the weight was resting on your knees, or a lot of the weight is resting on your butt, or a lot of the weight is resting on a certain part of your leg or your ankle, that particular point might hurt after a while. So seeing if you can find a way that is comfortable and in a dignified posture, but also an even distribution of weight might help take pressure off any one specific area. That's something that I wish I would have been told from an earlier point in my meditation, but like I said, sometimes you learn these things as you go, and you will find what position works best for you over time. Another tip that I wish I would have known was to not be so hard on myself, and to recognize that if there's ever a point in the meditation where the anger towards myself or the frustration towards the self or the practice is flaring, and maybe you have some experience with this and maybe you don't yet, but it will inevitably happen. There will be some frustration during the practice. And if this happens, just knowing that it's okay to find something that brings rest and calm and peace during the practice. So for me, this is how it works for me. I'll be sitting for long periods of time, and what I will inevitably experience is a point of frustration towards myself, because deep down in me, what is a strong pattern in me is to judge myself and to be critical, and that includes during my practice. And when this starts flaring up, what happens is I get consumed in the anger at times. And what has been very helpful to me is to recognize that anger or that frustration as it's happening, and instead of sitting with it so that it consumes me and I lose my awareness and I become only just the anger, just the frustration, I let myself rest for a little and sort of reset, and then re-engage in whatever practice I was practicing in. So for example, say I choose the breath as an object of meditation, and during this I get very frustrated for whatever reason. And every time I try to come back to the breath, it's very frustrating. If I'm just spinning my wheels and frustrating myself, I learned over time that it's okay to choose something else, maybe another object of meditation, or maybe no object at all, and just resting in my awareness and letting myself cool down. It's almost like a flame. When I get frustrated at myself, there's like this flame raging inside of me. And it's okay to do whatever I may need to do to let that flame subside a little, so that it's just, almost like coals on a fire after the fire's already gone out, and just kind of like simmering there. Because then you have the chance to look at this frustration, but you're looking at it from a more balanced place where you're not totally consumed by it, not totally consumed by this fire. It's almost like, if you think of it like a fire, right? The fire is raging. You can't get close enough to look at it because it's too hot. But if you let the fire calm down a little, you can get a little closer and see what's happening in those coals. And during the meditation practice, it's similar. So there's this frustration, and in the past I would try to look directly at it, look directly at a raging fire, because everything that I thought I had learned was to look at whatever was there. And what I'm learning over time is that, yes, you can look at it, whatever was there, but you don't have to torture yourself. You can... So for me, if I'm getting frustrated, I might rest my attention on the awareness of the palms of my hand, because that will settle me a little. Or even place my hand on my heart. Whoops, I think I just hit the mic there. Yeah, so even place my hand on my heart, because I moved my hand to my heart as I was saying that. And what this does for me is it reminds me that I can care for myself, and I can bring that gentleness towards myself as a way of letting the flames come down a little. So then I can, with a clearer mind and a more stable ground, look at what's really going on and where's this frustration coming from. So then the frustration becomes a gift. It's like something I can learn from. When it's not consuming me, it can be something that I can learn from. Because these patterns that I have of judging myself or being frustrated at myself during the practice inevitably are going to happen throughout my daily life. And if I can learn from them in my practice, then it becomes a gift. So in my life, when I'm at work or when I'm talking to friends and I see myself judging myself, I know that pattern more intimately because during my practice, I gave myself this stable ground to look at it and to understand, to look at the pattern clearly and to know, okay, what is it that's happening in me? So that when it happens in daily life, I will have a better understanding of it. So I would say that's as far as I would go on that tip. I'm trying to think of another tip that I might share. I think if I had to share another tip, I would say it's kind of piggybacks on what I said in the beginning of the podcast. And it is not trying so hard to make sense of all of this stuff in the mind. So maybe even while you're listening to me, there may be efforts to grab this information and compartmentalize it and memorize it, so that you can apply it later, which is how at least I was taught from a very young age. It's like, here's some material, write it down, memorize it, and then regurgitate it at a later point so that we can give you a grade. And as well as you memorize it and are able to apply it at a later date, that's your the recognition of how smart you are or how well you're doing. And this is sort of a different experience. In learning mindfulness and in learning meditation, my tip would be not trying so hard to grab all of this information. Like, trust that the body and the mind will remember what it needs to remember when it needs to remember it. I'll give you an example. I've read many books on meditation and mindfulness and psychology and trying to learn about myself, and a lot of times it feels like none of these things are sticking, like I'm not learning anything. It's just a bunch of words, and I don't feel like I've changed in any way after reading or listening to podcasts or whatever method I'm using to try to learn. And then 6 months later, I go on a meditation retreat, and I'm sitting there silently, and out of nowhere, something I read 6 months ago or heard a year ago, one sentence from a book I read or from a talk I listened to comes up. And it comes up in my mind, and it makes sense in a way that it didn't make sense when I was reading it or listening to it. So now that I've had that experience a bunch of times, where something that I thought didn't stick or that I wasn't learning, I learned at a later time that, oh, I did take that with me, and it came to me when I needed it. Knowing that going forward, when I read or when I listen to podcasts or when I listen to different Dharma talks or any way I try to learn, it's like I'm not trying to grasp so hard as I'm reading it or as I'm listening, because I can trust that whatever resonates with me will be in there. It's like a seed underneath the soil that it's there, but it has to find the right time to sprout. And there are some things you'll read and learn that may never sprout, and there are some things that will. So that would be my tip, is as far as the intellectual side of the mindfulness and meditation practice, that like going out and reading and listening to podcasts and trying to learn, going into that with not trying so hard to grasp and memorize, but reading it lightly and listening lightly, and trust that the body and the mind will remember what it needs to remember, and it'll come back when it needs to come back. So I think that's probably all the tips that I'll share today. I just wanted to express gratitude to those of you who are still listening at this point. And if you're in the area, I'm in my meditation centers in South Huntington, Long Island. If you're in the area, we are going to be offering weekly classes on Sundays. They're usually going to be from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., but you can go to the website www.themindfulplace.net, and you can see the calendar of when the classes will be held, and you can pre-register to save money there. But so that'll be it for today. Thank you for listening. Take care.